companies expand to the cloud, asset visibility worsens. The Jupiter One Cyber Asset Management Platform helps you get it back. Jupiter One provides context, understanding, and visibility into your entire cyber asset attack surface. With over 150 integrations, including AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, and more, Jupiter One helps you answer complex security and infrastructure questions, understand the contextual relationships between assets, and build the foundation for your security program. Try it for yourself. Get started with your free Jupiter One account today.
This episode is sponsored by Hunters. Hunters is a SOC platform that ingests data from your IT and security tools and applies a built-in detection engine encoded with hundreds of TTPS, attack methodologies, and threat intelligence. Security teams use Hunters to reduce mean time to detect and respond by automatically investigating, correlating, and prioritizing suspicious events. Combining Hunters SOC platform with Snowflake's data lake can help your security team achieve greater coverage at a predictable cost and mitigate threats faster, more reliably than a SIEM. Visit hunters.ai to learn more. Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Coffee with Ashish for Cloud Security Podcast. Today is the final episode for Google Cloud Security Month. I know it's March, but we're still finishing it up. So I had so many people to talk about and so many things to talk about. So I wanted to make sure at least I got you guys value. And I have a special guest for you for this one. So the guest is Sunil, but before we get into the Sunil part, I just want to say this episode is going to be live on YouTube, Twitter as well. So if you're watching a rewatch of this, feel free to kind of come onto the website and have a look at the transcript notes as well. But enough said, let's go into the show with Sunil Potti. And I want to bring up the music as always. Let's get this going. Hey, welcome, Sunil. Thanks for coming in, man.
Yeah, Ashish, great to be on, and thanks for humoring me with the Starman soundtrack.
Oh my God, no, this is definitely. It's funny. It's one of those songs that everyone knows it, but everyone, people don't. At least I don't listen to it often. But when I heard it, I'm like, oh, I know this song. So yeah. I'm glad you came in, man, and thank you for coming to the Virtual Coffee with Ashish, and cheers as well. I think where it is, there is. Cheers. Thanks for coming in.
I said, there's a backdrop for the Starman song. When you ask me, hey, pick a song, it is, you're precisely right. It's one of those songs that generally, you hear it on and off, but you don't actually know the name of the song at the singer. Right? But the reason why I know it is my son's actually going through college application season.
All right.
One of the colleges asks for, what is the song that currently best describes the current state of your life? And I remember during Christmas holidays when, he was just sitting there, he's doing his work, I'm just doing my stuff. And he was like, hey, what do you think about songs? And, he's got a different taste and all that. And then, we just happened to be playing some songs and both of us coincidentally liked the same song, even though we didn't know what the song was, right? And then, of course, you go through the lyrics and all, right? It's actually quite interesting. But anyway.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so.
Well, I'm sure your son is proud right now when he hears this. It's like, oh, like my dad kind of bought the song, representing the song over here. So I'm pretty sure he's happy with that as well.
I think that is the first and last time he's probably going to do a college essay jointly with me, I think, right? But probably good for his chances of getting in.
Wait, so is he going through the essay thing right now, or has he already gone through this?
He's done. Right. All so right. They're all like, the season is done normally around, I think, Christmas time frame or something.
Oh, right. Fair enough. So that's sweet. No, at least he's gone through the process, so he's happy with it as well, because that's kind of where it's going with it. But I mean, I know you and I can start off with the whole intro thing, but I would love to kind of share a bit of insight about yourself. If you can share where kind of your journey started and how you landed in where your current role is and developing amazing Google Cloud Security products.
No, yeah. I mean, and thanks for, by the way, giving me the opportunity. And, I've looked up a bunch of stuff that you guys have been doing for a while. It's both, sort of like exciting in some ways with like core nuggets. I may not listen to it the first full 60 minutes, but, just to be very clear, I'm not a security practitioner by any means, any depth. I have colleagues and various folks inside our team who are really good. I mean, some of you might know a person called Phil Venables, who is to be the CISO at Goldman Sachs, and he works in our in our teams. We've got Heather Adkins, who's been on the front line of threat intelligence and incident response for many years. So we've got lots of good people. So most of my thing is to make sure that we could make progress materially on two dimensions. One is, generally Google tends to be a much more of a missionary company, right? Obviously we have to build a business around ads and all the usual stuff, but at the core of it, a lot of the people that work inside Google are all about end customer impact, right? From a non-monetary side first, and then of course alongside it, look, you can't, there has to be this. I don't know how many folks know this, but Larry, one of the founders of Google, many years ago, every time you have an annual letter of some sort, you write a letter from the CEO. And he writes this letter like for a company that was built with a lot of missionaries, and I'm ad-libbing it here, but basically mission orientation was big, which is like search was about organizing the world's information, right?
Right.
To make it useful. It wasn't about let's go sell ads, right? Even though that's what we do, right? As one of the core. But the idea was, look, the best way that we could operationalize missionary work is when you don't have to look for money. Because if you look at normal life, right, some of the biggest missions or whatever, they always go look for money and all. But imagine if you had an awesome business funding your mission. And that's really how we rationalize, frankly, how it's important to be both, mission oriented from a consumer and an enterprise side, but also be, responsible from building a good business that can support that mission. And so that's really where we are. At least my role is more around, I guess, being the person who can shepherd the funding required to support the long term mission. While we have a lot of people, and that's really what cloud security is. It's a business within the Google Cloud, one of 3 or 4 big businesses, and we take care of protecting Google Cloud and Google, as well as obviously providing tools and building a business around it.
Yep. Sweet. And so, but I'm curious, where was your journey? Kind of like, how did you kind of come across?
Yeah.
You're not a practitioner, but you're a product person.
Yeah, exactly. So most of my background, as some people would know, I'm mostly a technologist by training, more a classical software engineer, moved up the stack, became a product owner, then became a business owner, and shunted around between mostly infrastructure, right? Even though I had a few forks into apps. And I think it's an interesting story about how I ended up at Google is like, a lot of people don't know. Everybody knows Larry and Sergey are the 2 key folks at Google, but there's actually, in my opinion, a third founder behind the scene. And there's a guy called Urs Hosley, who's my sort of manager, right? But Urs was like the first person who essentially built, I guess, the first rack for Google in 1990.
Really?
Right? But he was the first VP of engineering. He was a professor. Google. There's a nice, interesting story, by the way. So for folks who really know Google from the beginning, and even today, he's one of the few people still not only at Google, but still leading change in a secular way. And by the way, coincidentally, I know you're out of Sydney. She's very based.
You're Melbourne, Australia, yeah.
Oh, Melbourne. Okay. So we actually moved to New Zealand last year, and but what happened was about 2.5 years ago when I'd finished a stint at this company called Nutanix, and we'd done well pre-IPO and all that. So I was actually thinking of how to just basically hanging up my guns and just helping others. And Urs and I took some long walks, and he said, look, come in, we're trying to transform the world, but do it from an enterprise side. We've done a good thing on that side. And he says, okay. I said, okay, we kind of like each other. We kind of like some people. So let me try this out. And it so coincidentally happened that security happened to be something that was a juicy spot. Okay. Right. It could have been anything. And
okay.
I got to tell you that the one interesting area was, all I could say was that even though I could, I knew about security as a second tier, because when you build infrastructure, obviously the security and all, but what I could sense even then was, and I'll give you my 2 cents on, how some of that has come out serendipitously correct, is I felt like it would be interesting to work on areas which are going to be big macro tailwinds, where Google has some core IP, even though we do a lot more to build around ourselves with our partners or whatever it is. but it was something that was going to be very top of mind, even at an Alphabet level, not just at a Google Cloud level. And
Right.
and obviously, cyber in the last 2 years, especially with the recent incidents and so forth, things have already jacked up. But 2.5 years ago, that was the spirit behind me getting into leading Google Cloud Security, because we had compute storage and infrastructure already being run. We had apps like Workspace, Meet, things like that. Then we had
Mhm.
data, ML, and then we up-leveled security, knowing that. And I think some of this is what we'll talk about. Is I genuinely believe that right now, cyber and security tends to be a feature or a subcategory of cloud, let us say, or something like that. But
Yep.
just like mobile was viewed 15 years ago as a subcategory of desktop, until Zuckerberg said, look, we're going to stop Facebook app and only have Facebook mobile, right? Remember that became Facebook.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
actually, yeah, and I actually think, anyway, we'll get into this, but I actually think cyber will be at an arc of elevation, the same as cloud or mobile. But let's see.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, okay, yeah, because that kind of is a good segue into my first question as well, because I think when I was researching for this interview, one of the first things I came across was that announcement that you were doing for Google Next last year around the
Yeah.
whole invisible security as well, and the thinking behind it, which maybe kind of aligns really well with what you were saying here as well, in terms of starting to build that arc, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what's the thinking behind the whole invisible security approach?
Yeah. So invisible security is sometimes when you are blessed with both a team and a platform that can genuinely look for the long term, right? So you're not worried about
Mhm.
transactional 1 quarter, 6 months at a time, or a year. And not everybody has that luxury. But at the same time, you have to be responsible to show, remember to my first point, to actually show outcomes, right, along the way. But you normally need to have a real true north. And the true north for us, and what we've seen inside Google as well, because a lot of the learnings is coming from inside Google, which everybody will think, oh, Google is modern, it doesn't have the problems that, say, a bank in Melbourne has. Trust me, over the last 20 years, there's like 3-4 stages of legacy still, right? and
Right,
uh and
right, of course.
we don't have mainframes, but we have quite a bit of legacy, right? And
Right.
so the art of invisible security is to simply say, look, I mean, if you drive a Tesla today, as an example, now it's not for everyone and so forth, but the initial reason why we all drove Tesla was for obviously the emissions, you know, all electric, the
Yep,
mission orientation.
environmentally friendly. Yep.
Yeah, the mission orientation. Of course, you got great acceleration along the way and all that good stuff, but in reality, the reason why, if you really say why are people sticking to it,
Hmm.
more than other things, is because of the fact that they've actually used software to drive the car. And and many of the things that were visible is what I call it. Like, how do you actually worry about lane control? Forget about auto driving, right? But a lot of things that were like visibly in human judgment are now being optimized with some intelligence. And so the fact that over time, of course, it's a little dangerous to kind of just delegate everything. But if you really did the same analogy to like the world of security and so forth, like, you have to be, because if you think about, we used to have this analogy that like most of these innovations in security were being done to fix issues with other innovations in security. As in, most
Right.
new tools in security are being built to fix problems with other tools in security, right? And I think in every market there's a little bit of that. But so anyway, the point of universal security is, could you take a full step back and think through what does it mean to, and again, a lot of people will hesitate when we use this word, but to not take security for granted, but to be very intentional that
Hmm.
every 6 to 12 months, you're not making up for mistakes over the last 12 months. But in fact, if you're moving the ball forward, and to do that, what invisible security is all about is saying, look, you have to do this in like 3-4 vectors. The first vector
Yep.
is, everybody knows this, like, you can't have security built in, bolted on. It needs to be what we call designed in or engineered in. And we talk about operations. I saw Hunters right now as an ad, great founder there. But you'll see a lot of activity here. But in our opinion, I think SOCs of the future ultimately have to be autonomous. not just automated. And we could talk a little bit about what that means, right?
Yeah.
And then similarly, if you did the first two, which is if you were able to really engineer in security controls, right, in a true left shift way and all that good stuff, and
Yeah.
convert operations to be autonomic, then you get the third angle, which is, look, we all know the talent problem is a big problem right now with security. And how do you democratize it, right? And just like, IT ops got democratized with DevOps and so forth. So, and if you did those three, which is engineering in security, if you made operations autonomic, and then third, if you're able to democratize talent, okay, for security piece, then you can actually change the dynamics of risk, especially in cloud. And this is a longer discussion, but I'll just state it that the last vector of invisible security is like everybody says, oh, come to cloud, we'll make it more secure, blah, 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 right? Which fundamentally is true, but it's still a shared responsibility model. Like a bank runs on a cloud provider, bank gets breached. Nobody really gets fired at the cloud, right? A lot of people get affected. So how can you change from a shared responsibility model to what we call a shared fate model, right? And anyway, so the aspect of invisible security is to solve for all four of those dimensions, from people, risk management, operations side, as well as the actual tooling and so forth. So,
and I think you touched on the whole automation side of things as well, as to how that can probably, to your point, in a Tesla as well, you don't really see what happens. You just like, oh, it's a feature, you turn it on, and next thing you know, you have lane control. Next thing you know, you have self-driving. So how important do you feel as the automation component in making security truly invisible, I guess, to your point?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, you see, if you just think about the Tesla example, it's just, people use the word software-defined data centers. That's essentially a software-defined car, right? In a loosely defined way. And then over time, it's just not software, it's intelligence, right? Because they're using usage metrics, data metrics. Obviously, there's a level of like, whatever you want to call it, whether it's simple learning, deep learning, whatever mechanisms are, it's able to kind of use some things beyond just automated software to drive a little bit more intelligence, right? In terms of like control and so forth. So same things with security, in my opinion, is I think we're still probably, like if you think about the analogy to that industry, I think cloud is equivalent to going into electric vehicles, as in that required a core architectural change, right? Is different, the waves is this thing and all, right? So that takes years, right? I mean, it takes decades and all. So right now we have cloud, in my opinion, because without an element of that, and when I say electric, the way it was designed was it was just not electric, right? They designed it to be driven by software. It so happened that electric aspects were like the compelling event to come over from the old school to the new school, right? So to me, cloud is that, which is there were some compelling initial moments, like, oh, start small, start quickly, scale as you go, which you couldn't do on-prem. But in reality, the bigger elements of this is the fact that you can afford to become data-driven, more intelligence-driven in anything that you do. And security is just a good example of that. Okay, so in operations, and particularly what I mean by that is, the reality is that if I'm a customer who's all in on cloud, as in like all my workloads are on cloud, life in some ways is still complex because you still get hit by DDoS attacks, you still get hit by breaches and all, but you're already a couple of decades ahead of the traditional mainstream enterprise, because the mainstream enterprise, the risk is defined as your lowest, your weakest link, right? And your weakest link could be laptop on-prem, as you know. So one of the ways we have thought about operations is that it cannot be something that is only available when you are only a cloud user. Operations, in our opinion, the way we think about, the classical world, that, there's a lot of buzzword bingo of XDR and so forth. But ultimately what it comes down to is you have to be able to first start with detecting everything. And what I mean by that is whether it's a DNS record update, whether it's an endpoint detail, whatever it is, you should be able to take all that events and throw it to a data lake and not worry about cost. Because the moment you start, you can't respond to things that you can't detect, right? You know what I mean, right? So in operations. And so many of the issues that has happened is that people are are, sort of like over the last decade of architectures, you can't store more data for more than 3 months. It's just, too expensive. And then two, my SOC queries, when they run on data that's more than a few months, takes forever. So if I'm a SOC analyst sitting there, it's a really painful exercise, right? So
Yeah.
so that is one of the foundational things we have tried to solve in Google Cloud, is if you
Yeah.
really think about security operations, you have to start with these new generation building blocks. And one of the building blocks is to detect everything without, sort of penalizing you on cost. So whether it's a
Yeah.
petabyte of data or a terabyte of data, you should be able to throw it into this and it will suck it up, whether it's a couple of years worth of data, whatever, and you're not penalized by cost. And then two, you need to be able to search on top of that in the way that you currently are used to searching for Google, right? On search. And between both of those, Google knows something about storing lots of data and searching across lots of data, right? So we're bringing that competency into security operations. And then overlaid on that core building block is the ability that if you can track, not just, you're not just automating using a workflow for detection and response, you're actually infusing true machine learning from a modeling perspective, so that both the data elements of like usage and all the associated things that allow us to predict events and so forth, but more importantly, this building block of detecting everything, searching for everything, between those two, we think a next generation SOC platform can be built, or a SOC solution. And that's not just us, right? I mean, this with customers, partners, and a bunch of things. But let me pause there because there's a lot there to unpack.
Yeah. I was going to say it's actually really interesting because the whole security operation, almost like a first principle thinking of how and why we do security operation in the first place. And a lot of times the conversation kind of ends with, well, we can't really detect everything in cloud, or we have to pay so and so to the SIEM provider, or to kind of make some sense of. So 100% on the money there. If that was not a problem, I can imagine a lot more people would be, I guess, leaning more towards the whole machine learning angle as well, to be able to provide, because then you can just focus on asking intelligent questions in your query instead of how much this is going to cost me and are we detecting everywhere, because which is a basic question you can't go beyond sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, going back to the analogy of Tesla and others, right? So you're getting all these features as updates.
Yeah.
So that means afford to do more things, or I'm doing more while I'm driving now than I've ever done 5 years ago, right? It's not step function cost changes. So that's what I think you hit it on the head is, and Google does this quite well, is because remember I said we had this luxury of thinking a little bit long term while trying to act long term, is to apply first principles to figure out what were the core building blocks that need to be rethought. And if you remove some of those constraints, or you simplified some assumptions, then you can unlock a lot of potential that otherwise was incremental.
Yeah, 100%. And do you find that enterprise usually, or maybe, I guess, people who are consuming Google Cloud in general, customers your team may be talking to as well, do they realize, I guess, are they thinking about cloud security the right way? Because, to your point, we're talking long term. A lot of people are still stuck with mainframe, and unfortunately or fortunately, mainframe still doesn't have an equivalent in the cloud space from a compute perspective. But do you find that people are thinking about this the right way? And if they're not, how should they be thinking about cloud security, I guess?
Yeah, look, I actually think the general ecosystem of security is relatively savvy now compared to like other silos I've seen in the industry, whether it be infrastructure, so forth. Partly because, I use this analogy when I give this to our own, like, exec staff and all, is like everybody talks about silos of technology, right? From apps to this thing. And every year there is innovation in each area. Like, storage goes through some innovations, analytics goes through some innovations, whatever, right? And security is also going through some market innovations and so forth. But other than all of them, security is different in one other way. It is also being prodded by adversaries actively. What I mean by that is not just market-oriented innovations. Nobody's waking up in the morning somewhere in the world and saying, let me reduce the number of IOPS that Google Cloud S3 or Amazon's S3 buckets are serving up. Nobody's doing that, right? Whereas in the world of security, we all know this. Like, we have to work with both angles. Well, the point behind that is, what I'm trying to say is that if you think about helping customers on this journey in this era where it's feeding off both market and adversaries, right? And where adversaries could be whether it's nation state or like traditional actors and so forth, right? But
Of course. Yeah.
they feed off each other. The only way you get ahead of it is to use this newfound building blocks. That's what I meant. That's why it's super important. Like you have to be able to throw events into a day lake without having to worry about cost. You need to be able to index and search that at planet scale speeds, things like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But with the one caveat that you can't, when we say cloud security, you can't assume that everybody will have to be on cloud. And that is one of the big changes we've done over the last few years. Is it's very easy. Like if you're like Amazon or somebody, like you can afford to, like, you come to Amazon, you build a lot of products, then I can use like 20 other services to protect those services, right? But with Google, what we have done is, if you come to Google Cloud, yes, you have a lot of like posture management, all the way from low level chipsets in Titan to all the way to like governance controls. It's sort of like in my phone, right? This is an opinionated full stack device, right? So if you come to it between software, camera, all the way to like the chips, there's a level of trusted boundaries and so forth. And that's what we can offer in a full stack GCP environment. But we also know that unlike consumers, every enterprise has a bit of, I can use cloud, but I also have a lot off-prem, right? Or whether other clouds or on-prem, right? So a lot of the way we want to deliver this first principles approach to cloud security is to actually deliver it as a SaaS offering, so that you can modernize security in place wherever you are. You're having to actually do this only when you're on cloud. And a good example, I don't know if you know this, is like one of the things that Google does really well was, we collect a lot of data because there's Chrome is deployed everywhere, as you can imagine. And from a good, healthy signals, we collect phishing attack issues and all that. And, if you know this thing, the squiggly lines of reCAPTCHA that used to be out there, and now it becomes traffic signals, and now it's morphing even to something more.
Yeah.
And so that's a good example of that whole backend is powered on a Google scale infrastructure. We don't charge customers for the data that we collect and all, because it's about the mission. But either for free or a nominal cost, you as a customer on every digital property that you have can use reCAPTCHA for anti-phishing, right? So that's an example of, I'm getting protection the way that I would get protection if all of my workloads were on cloud, but I'm not on cloud and I can still consume it. So those are examples. So for example, Chronicle is another good example of, hey, can I reimagine my next generation security analytics or security operations solution, but do it in a way that I don't have to be on Google, right? As in, like, I could be completely on premise and still use it as a SaaS offering. So that's going to be an important thing of cloud security, is to build it with cloud architectural principles and capabilities, but have the flexibility to deliver them as a traditional offering, if you know what I mean. As in, or at least meet customers where they are. You don't have to be on cloud all the time. So that's the subtle part.
Oh, right. So that's where the SaaS angle kind of comes in because then it doesn't matter if the thing is on premise or in another, whatever the next version of cloud is going to be.
And it's almost like, it's almost like Tesla, or I'm just making this up now. They said all this, but the only way you can charge your car is to go back to the factory or something. Like, there's such a tie-in to where things were built or orchestrated. So because of the fact that we were able to bottle up cloud capabilities, cloud delivered capabilities, but manifest them for consumption wherever customers are, right? Whatever the environments are, it helps the customer situation, the posture, everything else become more modernized way sooner, because the arc of consumption on cloud is going to take a long time. And whereas the arc of like security modernization can precede that, in my opinion, because you can now modernize in place, and so therefore you can get more smarter, more hip, more secure, even without having to wait to come to cloud. And in many cases, we know it's not going to ever be 100% on cloud, right? So that's the
point.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you finish your thought.
No, I'm just finishing up. That's one of the reasons we go back to my first point, Ashish, that why I think security or cyber cannot be stuck as a feature of cloud. because cloud as an arc will take a long time, man, as you know.
It will.
It's fast.
Yes.
It's going to take a long
Yes.
time, right?
It
Right?
will.
And it
Yeah.
may never be 100%, right? You know this, right? There'll be stuff
Yep.
that's all. If you always kept awesome security as a capability just of cloud, then you're missing the broader mission aspect of modernizing security for the world. So that's why if you decouple it as a SaaS offering, and then of course, look, you can do everything as SaaS. Like you could do some things if you have chipsets and things, but it allows you, in my opinion, to think about cyber and security, therefore, as a separate arc than cloud for that reason. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making sense.
It does, and I think it's really interesting how you put it, because I was just thinking about that. By the way, it's a great analogy with Tesla going back to the factory thing as well, because that's what tends to happen with the whole IaaS and PaaS as well at this point in time. For everything, you kind of have to go to the mothership. Well, whether it's Amazon or Azure or whatever, you kind of have to go to the mothership to kind of change configuration or change whatever. But if it's a SaaS offering, everyone knows what the standard catalog is, and you can make a few changes here and there, but to a large extent, it's flexible enough that it can be used by anyone. I think where I'm going with that is like kind of what that means is there's a lot of conversation in the industry about, oh, I'm going to be multi-cloud or hybrid, and like I don't know what's like 6 types of cloud, but security tends to get this challenge even now, where how do we have a security which is across the board? Because to what he said, first principle thinking on the whole security aspect, you don't really care if it's Google Cloud, Azure, AWS, whatever the cloud may be. For you, security is just like, I want to protect this asset. I want this to be available 24/7 because that's what the business runs on. Availability is important. The confidentiality is important. Integrity is important. So I should be able to maintain that and manage that without thinking about, oh, I need to go to the mothership, so maybe I can make this little change and then come back. Oh, there's another one, so I'm going to make another change over there. And I wonder if how many people are thinking like that. So I love the way you kind of approach the whole almost like standardizing security is probably how I would explain it. At least having the ability to standardize security.
Yeah. No, I think in general, right? Obviously, standardization. And by the way, these are all words, and these things, as you can imagine, like it'll soak in, and we'll have to show some outcomes, and then eventually, some customer, some practitioner somewhere will really come up with the right, in my opinion, word, and then everybody else, copy paste it. But I actually this the whole point of invisible security, man, is about making things simple, not simplistic, right? I think those are two separate things, right? And the more, and the definition of making things simple is to reduce the number of moving parts, right? Like in design, people teach us, like, the one way to make a thing much more simpler is to actually remove the moving parts, right?
Yep.
And that might actually mean removing features. That's why on a phone, you can do a lot of things that you can do on other devices. But then that's why this is more secure than some of these devices, right? And so I think by an intentional approach that doesn't take away functionality, because this gives a lot of functionality, but inserts in, like I said, some good practices, such as, hey, when you build a new app, this is the kind of capabilities you need. If you deploy an app that's already built somewhere onto cloud, you can get this secure container of some sort of practices. And oh, by the way, if you happen to have an old app, it's sitting on premise, then you can get all of these, but you still need to get some level of next generation security. A good example of that is zero trust, right? Like, the word gets zero trust washed as often as cloud washed, but Google, based on its own experiences, I won't say wrote the book, but we wrote the paper on Beyond Corp like 3-4 years ago. And lots of other companies are now implementing it. But the point of that is to say, hey, you know what? We leverage our network. We leverage this capabilities of delivering a series of these global proxies that allow you as a customer, anywhere you are, to say, look, I don't have to rely on my network security. I just have users wherever they are, connect to apps wherever they are. It could be inside, outside, but I'm not able to trust all the weak links of the network, right? So that's an example of where, without you having to even move a workload to cloud, you used cloud to better secure yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think maybe this is where you were referring to the whole detect everything and trust nothing as well.
Yeah. So that's how that's the yin and yang now, right? Is that if you're, in our opinion, like, there are these vectors of, like, security operations and, parallel things, endpoint detection and response, these big markets, right? But these are like functional markets, and there's something good about those because they are very targeted. Like, I need to replace AV. Well, I don't want to do that with like a SOC solution, right? I mean, it has to be a dedicated solution. Yes, you should do it better, and that's what EDR was born and so forth. But in my opinion, just as a meta priority, like, again, if you really wanted to up-level security within an organization, if you applied first principles to say, look, you should be able to detect everything and then also be able to trust nothing, right? So a customer can bring their own device into it. So I should be able to say every employee should be in BYD environment. Like, those constructs should all be inherently baked into your security architecture of brain. So that's what we boil it down to, those two simple words of, you need building blocks or solutions that allow you to detect everything, which is this next generation of security operations and so forth. And you need to trust nothing. And then if you're at least at that baseline of those two, then you can start building a whole bunch of other things on top to kind of accelerate momentum. Right. So
and where do you see software supply chain kind of fit into all this then? Because you mentioned zero trust as well. Where does where does that kind of fit into this?
Yeah, it's a great segue. I mean, up in the recent times, I would say that has emerged to become, at least from a rhetoric perspective, and obviously in a reality, right? It's in between Log4j, but also before that, it's started to emerge as a first class thing. I think it is not as cloud washed as zero trust yet, or endpoint of sweeper. But genuinely, I think, you see, what is the meta why for it? If you believe that every company is becoming a software company, generally speaking, that's a true statement, right? Like,
that's
bank increasingly a software company and so forth. That means that just like you would have protected your traditional IP, a lot of your IP is code, right? And so are you taking an intentional approach to protect code the way you're done for the rest of your infrastructure, like customer data, right? So, and it took us 20 years to build a good environment in any security practitioner's environment around personal data, right? Business data and so forth. But if code is now equally important, we need the same level of rigor or something else. That's the meta why. Okay. And especially with this new age of like vulnerabilities, like what we saw with Log4j, it's hard. And the more every enterprise is now leveraging open source in particular, where it's a free for all, right? And that can manifest everywhere. So in our opinion, again, Google does this quite often, is whenever we want to get into a top of mind market, we first analyze whether we ourselves had a problem and whether our problem was representative of the mainstream market. Because sometimes we have problems that very few people see, right? And we have to be careful not to kind of impose that to the world. Okay. And we heard that for a lot of people. Oh yeah, these Google guys, they come and they talk about stuff, and man, it only works at Google, not for us. So just be aware that, look, we've moved on from some of that. but in supply chain is a good example, right? We use open source libraries everywhere. We create binaries, we put them in artifact registries, we push them out. Any developer could be sitting in a Starbucks, with all the zero trust and all, but anything is possible, right? To kind of get in either through the open source or our own supply chain. So we came up with something called, and you can go look it up, SLSA, but it's a fancy name. We call it SALSA, but essentially software lifecycle. But it's a blueprint like we did for BeyondCorp 5 years ago, right? We wrote the paper on it. We have some and tools, but the goal is everybody in the open source world or everybody in the community should be able to adopt those best practices without requiring our tools. So the simple answer there is, in my opinion, that is something that I would rather not become as big as zero trust or something. That means that we have failed to actually contain that problem, right? When you actually have a $10 billion, $5 billion technology industry around it. So I would urge most people to kind of up level that. In the simplest case, sometimes you have to do it by hiring one person or making one person responsible for your software supply chain. Let them go figure out best practices initially on your existing stuff. Go figure out right OSS libraries to use or not. Some basic stuff with some responsibility is good stuff. So.
It's such an interesting point because one of the guests who had come in, and basically there was a stat that came out that almost 80 to 90% of the code that is written by most organizations these days is someone else's code because of the open source libraries being used.
Yeah.
You think that you probably made something really unique, but a lot of times because of the open source libraries being used, someone like it could be another Sunil, another part of the world has written it and was probably the most easiest library.
Or a third party, right? I mean, you just look at
Or
any
third party as well.
use Google code. Let's just say
Yeah.
you're using Google technology. Behind the scene, Google technology using open source too, right? So the dependency graph
right.
actually, is pretty high. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. And I think it is definitely becoming a reality for a lot of security folks. You kind of like almost like, to your point, have a few buckets. And I wonder how this would affect the whole security modernization, but the whole supply chain, software supply chain, then you have the zero trust, which obviously with the whole COVID of the world has gone even more. I think pre-COVID, if you talk about zero trust, people just roll their eyes like, yeah, there's another guy who's like wants to talk about zero trust. But now people are actually considering, zero trust should be a thing.
Yeah.
So
100%.
do you find that the whole COVID thing has affected anything else as well? I mean, there was a whole digital transformation thing that was kind of going on with the COVID world. Do you find that anything else has changed?
I think it's a great question. Look, my sense is for sure a hybrid work environment is there forever now, right? We just know it.
Right.
So that means by default, building blocks like zero trust have to happen, right? Because you can't, like, there's no campus network, things like that, right? So by default, it means that some building blocks will happen. It's just a matter of time. So the whole zero trust, broader bandwagon is for sure something that'll happen. Second is anybody's endpoint is in any location, accessing anything, independent of zero trust. So that's another reason why everybody's into the whole endpoint detection response, right? I think that is that has to morph into something that protects that endpoint, right? And then I think there'll be these, like, if you just take a full step back, if the world was architected on these few building blocks, which was you detect everything, you trust nothing, right? Meaning as a runtime, you don't have to trust anything. And then whatever is happening there, from endpoint to your apps to databases, anything, everything is being logged from a security perspective at very low cost, can be accessed at very high speeds and being made available for triaging or whatever, right? If you add those two core platform building blocks, what are the functional areas that really then manifest are obviously you need a turnkey thing on the endpoint, like, everything around, because that's one key area. You definitely need something around my cloud. Just call it my cloud workloads as a container, right? So whether it be Google, Amazon, whatever, and that's why you have cloud security, posture management, cloud workload protection. There's a lot of buzzwords there, but my point is that's like another virtual, sort of area of focus that should become a big, intentional area. But then at the same time, you have obviously, constant things like identity, the usual supporting pillars of it. But the area, in my opinion, that we just talked about that is not as intentionally done, that needs more intention, is just like your workloads and your data security, your code security needs to be elevated at the same level that you're spending on apps or data and so forth, right? So that's one area that I would push people to move it up, because there's a lot of innovation and iteration happening at all levels, man. Like, I mean, this data governance is a big deal, especially if you're in Europe or in Asia Pacific. Sovereignty is becoming bigger and bigger. Data regionalization. People don't want data to travel back to US countries. So how do you regionalize? So all I'm saying is that all these market movements are all horizontal layers of capabilities that inevitably we will add into app security, data security, and all. But we just need to make sure that, like, just like endpoint, app, data, and then of course network and all is all zero trust and all, right? Code is also moved up, is all I'm trying to say, at that level of visibility.
Yeah, and to your point then, because I think this kind of reminds me of one of the questions that had come in when we had posted this thing, what was around the whole driving forces behind certain acquisitions that kind of Google has kind of done to place themselves in a better place to be in this kind of cybersecurity space. I think the question specifically was around the whole Siemplify Acquisition and what it meant for GCP customers. But I had to your point, now a meta question where why partner? Because to your point, Google has enough resources, enough talented, smart people. Why partner instead of just building yourself? Pick whichever one you want to answer first, I guess.
I mean, maybe I'll talk about the second question first, which is more like the why and the decision on what did we acquire, right? But why did you even acquire it? So generally speaking, obviously all companies like generally that pride themselves on building it natively and organically, and Google tends to be one of them. And over the years, it's not like we built Google out with like lots of acquisitions. So some companies are built with acquisitions.
Google, of course,
right? Yeah. And it's not like there's right or wrong one way or the other. It's more about like, we genuinely believe one of the things that Google has, it's not like, okay, yeah, people think there's some smart people and all that stuff. But one of the things that Google has is, and it's a little bit like our friends at Amazon also, but very few companies have that, is when you yourself are running one of the world's largest enterprise, whatever you build organically to support that large enterprise naturally can become something that you can make available to the world. So the fact that Google.com is one of the world's top 3 things, right? Just in terms of scale, surface area of attacks, you name it, man. The way we've had to do DDoS as an architecture, by the way. I mean, now it's known for everybody, but that the point is that we always use external things first, then we scale past them, then we go build it ourselves, and then it's a virtuous cycle, right? So one of the things that we've always felt was that, look, there's enough that we have to do at scale organically, and it's hard to find others that do it at that scale. So therefore, we have to do more organically. But in some areas, target areas, not just for time to market, for functional completeness, that we believe things were built from first principles correctly, then that can become a very synergistic thing into our portfolio. So rather than just acquiring things for functionality, we acquire things for obviously functionality and time to market, but we also look for, synergistic architectural capabilities that complement our first principles of architecture. So that's one of the biggest things that we saw in, if you think about reimagining security operations, as I said, you have to be able to, start with capturing all your events. You need to be able to search and investigate at scale, sub-milliseconds. But then at the same time, you need to have a workflow or an automation fabric that fundamentally is much simpler. Like it's much more modern. It is not like an old school business process workflow wrapped up into something, right? Where it requires expert rules and all that. So somebody had to have reimagined that. We could have done it. And then we've done some version of that inside Google. And that's what we found in the architectural principles that Siemplify had, frankly, right? And so that's really how the synergy came out, was that, okay, in addition to time to market, we need obviously a level of automation and orchestration. It's just that the way that we approach the problem, we believe, is much more enduring than, say, some of the tactical solutions.
Awesome. And I think the talking about priority also makes me realize that a lot of our listeners may be from some of the other cloud providers and maybe have started there. Everyone's watching Google Cloud from a distance as well. And because being number 3 doesn't mean you can clearly ignore the person. Like there's obviously a reason why a lot of customers have gone down the path of Google Cloud as well. So I'm curious, what can people expect in 2022 and beyond, I guess, from your vision perspective for cloud security from Google Cloud, I guess?
Yeah. No, I think some of this we hit this a little bit before, Ashish. I generally think most of next generation security technologies, but all technologies like analytics, has to be genuinely cloud native. So just make sure, my advice to most people is like, shake the tree on your vendor partners, that are they genuinely cloud native, like architecturally first principles, or are they like shim layers where they just racked a few VMs and moved it into GCP or Amazon? And a lot of people are like that, by the way. Okay.
Yeah.
But especially for Google Cloud, what we're focused on is, I'll just be very direct about this because I've been transparent on this, is like, all 3 of the cloud providers are taking security quite seriously, which is good for the ecosystem. We're taking slightly different approaches. Amazon, as I said, is doing a good job. They're our first class, company and cloud. So if you're building on Amazon, I have a bunch of tools that I could use,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But if I'm an enterprise customer that's using not just one cloud like Amazon, I still have my own cloud, which is on-prem, whether it's a cloud or not, right?
Yeah.
So what do you do there, right? Is always an open question.
Yeah.
And then Microsoft, on the other hand, has been very clear that, look, they really are in some ways similar to us in the sense they want to embrace security as a first party thing, and by the way, a variety of products, but they also want to be like viewed as the primary security vendor, right? In identity and the variety of areas, endpoint and everything. What we have done is not necessarily in the middle, it's a little bit more diagonally different, and it's similar to both, but it's different. Let me tell you what I mean. One is, like Amazon, we want to take a much more, and Google tends to do this way more than even any other cloud provider, is much more of a long-term view architecturally, that
Right.
whatever we do, we might be a year late, but it's much more enduring. Okay. Now, sometimes that hurts us because you need to get things to market very quickly and iterate, but and that's a little bit of an art that we're perfect. But the second thing that we also do is that we have chosen only a few areas to offer services to modernize in place, is what I call it. Remember, like zero
Yeah.
trust, security operations, payment fraud, those are the kinds of areas, right? Like if you do something in secure supply chain, it'll be done in a way so that you don't have to come to GCP to build your code. You can just generate, you could be in your own build area, CI/CD pipelines, and still consume awesome stuff from Google on the open source side,
Right.
right? So
Right.
that is core differentiation, is that we've chosen 4 or 5 areas where you can modernize security without having to come to GCP, unlike Amazon. But unlike
Yeah.
Microsoft, we also realize that there are other best-in-class partners that we have to create a 1+1=3 solution, right? Whether it be on endpoint as a good example, because a lot of the events come from endpoint systems. There are best-in-class providers there, like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne or CyberReason or whatever it is. And so similarly, in other pockets, we want to take an open approach, right? So that we can actually, sort of like provide the flexibility to leverage what a customer may have chosen with some of these other best-in-class, while still having an opinionated stack on zero trust, on security operation, like the main things we want to be like a full stack solution, right? So that's the big thing that you can envision from us is, again, going back to my first point on invisible security. One of the core themes is we have to find ways to make security invisible by left shifting it, by burning it in, both from a data layer and app layer, and then, as I said, right? So you should see more and more on that for sure. Okay, from GCP.
Awesome.
And then in addition, we should be able to talk about operations, making that simple as much as possible. And last but not least, it's this whole ability that if you do consume cloud, how can we help you mitigate risk, right? And this whole cyber insurance is a big fork for us. So
it's pretty awesome. And I think it's I love the fact that you guys have used the whole plug and play approach in a ways where it doesn't matter where you are. You can just plug. I mean, I guess, okay, universal socket for people who may be traveling, I guess. You can just, doesn't matter whether if you're on premise or any other provider. If you have the way you envision this, you should just plug and play a Google Cloud service, a security service, and not have to feel that, oh, I have to be on Google Cloud to use this service. It's kind of what happens with other providers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that thing has really helped us. If people talk about it, yeah, we're number 3 or whatever, but in many conversations a few years ago, we used to be far, right? Now, I'll give you a simple nuanced way to think about it. In digital natives, like .coms, right, companies, it's actually 1 and 2 between us and Amazon. In enterprises internationally, it's 1 and 2 between Microsoft and Google, right? Just because of our sheer, presence now in many things, right? And if you think about online commerce, we're probably number 1, because obviously, if you have an online commerce vendor, you wouldn't want to go to Amazon. It's competitive and all. Yeah. And so all I'm trying to say is that in the grand scheme of things, at one point we used to care about 3 versus 2, and it is important. But more importantly, what we have to keep in mind is, if you add up all the revenue from all 3 cloud providers, Ashish, between Amazon, Microsoft, and us, right? It's only $110 billion or so. And if you add up the so-called TAM for cloud over the next 5 years, people throw around big numbers like $500 billion, $1 trillion, $2 trillion still. So all that matters is really how fast does that transition to this cloud, right? Remember the arc that I was telling you. And that's why to us, security being split apart so that people don't have to wait for all of their workloads to be in cloud to be better protected is our mission, in Google at least. If that makes sense. And that's
It
what is
does.
it does from, say, an Amazon or somebody. So
Yeah, that's a good good way to kind of close off this conversation as well, because I think I love the vision, and I love how you started with the first conversation just being around mission driven, and kind of bring it back to like this is kind of where the mission is. Like you don't have to wait for the adoption curve to kind of go, reach its peak. You should be able to do these things beforehand. So I love the long term approach over there. But I've got three more questions. I know we're towards the tail end of the question. I've got three fun questions for you, not totally non technical, non cloud, non Google Cloud, just so that people get to know you a bit more. It's like, the first one being, what do you spend most time on when you're not working on Google Cloud and technology and all that? What do you spend most time on?
Especially after COVID, and some of my own folks know this, is whether it's at work or otherwise, I have a German Shepherd dog, and and especially post COVID, he's now the most walked dog on the planet. So one of the things, whether it's conversations like these or otherwise or personal or whatever, I guess one of the biggest things that I do recently is to use my German Shepherd. His name is Rocky, to stay fit.
Yeah.
So
all right. That's pretty cool, man. I think so. I used to see all these jokes about people walking way too much of their dog way too much during COVID, but I guess I have not met someone who's done it. So good on you.
No, it's true. It's true.
Yeah. Cool.
I think
next question.
Unfortunately, my dog might unfortunately have, there's this ailment called hip dysplasia, man, that gets and every time I see him, he's looking at me and saying, "Are you sure this is good for me?" Right?
Like 10,000 steps for me, 10,000 steps for my dog. The next question that I have is, what is something that you're proud of but is not on your social media?
There are lots of things that I'm not a big social media person, but but also I don't have a lot of things that I would say I'm proud of. But I think one thing that I would say that I guess I'm proud of is that I have dinners every month with people that I've worked over the last 20 years.
Really?
And across 4 or 5 companies.
Wow.
And it's not one-off dinners, but constant dinners. Basically, so my point is, I guess, not proud, but I'm happy that we have this extended human relationship formed way beyond our work. And which is one of the things that I hope to, I think even at Google, that we think of ourselves as also family more so than just work, right? So, but that's one of the things, for what it's worth.
Wow, that's a good one. I definitely aim to do that a lot more, but I think it's definitely I'm still working on that part. Final question.
Buying free drinks generally helps motivate.
Yeah, maybe I should start there first. Final question. What's your favorite cuisine or restaurant that you can share?
Favorite cuisine or restaurant? I think, ironically, I'll say a stereotype answer is Indian food. I've gone a close second is Italian food.
Nice.
But if I have to be, genuinely, honest, I think I keep going back to, I think those are the two that I mean, I eat all kinds of food and I love all kinds of cuisine, to be honest. But, and so it's not an exciting answer, but I do have some great recommendations of hole in the walls in pretty much every city that I hit. My goal is to find a few hole in the walls. And so, for example, one of the best pasta places that I've found in Europe is not in Italy. It happens to be in Brussels. And if somebody wants to know what it is, I think for what it's worth, I'll give you that on the site. But yeah, Indian and Italian food and hole in the walls.
Interesting. Hole in the wall. Oh, so I need definitely take some tips from you on that one as well. Sweet. Now that was kind of like the end of the interview. I'm gonna quickly go through some of the attendees thing. People just tune in to say hello. Just in case came in. Hey man, thanks for coming in. I think I hope thanks for tuning in from Kosovo, Europe. I didn't even know that where that is. That a city or definitely not a country?
Kosovo is in the older Yugoslavia.
There you go. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, man, or lady. It's hard to tell with the handles, online handles, if it's like what kind of gender the person is. So hello. Thanks for tuning in. We didn't have any questions over there, but I think any last piece of kind of commentary from your side on the whole Google Cloud space. I know you've been in this for quite a bit, and do you find that what's the one question that you think I should have asked you? I guess that's a pretty good one to ask.
I mean, that's always. I mean, you covered a lot of ground, so I won't get in there. But I'll answer the question that you asked, which is, hey, so what's something for the audience and all? I do think, look, especially if the audience is heavily security oriented, I do believe that the next 7-8 years, folks, will up level cyber to become as big as cloud, right? So it won't be like pulled into mobile, or it won't be pulled into cloud. It'll require its own arc. So the more I would advocate for the community to lean in on each other to build that, because remember how the mobile ecosystem has been built, right? And people think about crypto, and I think crypto obviously has leapfrogged a little bit with lots of noise and all, but I actually think the real there that is cuts across everybody is actually cyber. So just make sure that you don't lose sight of that. There's a lot of good things going on in your area. So invest more in learning, and growing yourself. And I think, from a career side, at least if I'm a security practitioner, I think some of the best years are ahead of us. So.
Well, that's good, because that's good to hear. And I think I've got a few more people as well who kind of came in. Darpan, love the Google security vision. Pedro is pretty happy with what we've spoken about as well. So I've got another person, Rama. Thanks, Sunil, for your insight, talking about vision and mission forward. Amazing chat to listen to. Great eye-opening for future cyber and security. Thanks for that, Rama. So overall positive feedback as well. So thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully we can kind of have you again and talk about the broader vision, and maybe next time we can talk about the next level of the meta conversation with Google Cloud Security. That'll be pretty awesome as well. So thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it.
Likewise, Ashish, and maybe next time we'll do it while I'm walking Rocky or something, man.
Oh, perfect. I would love that. I've actually had the offer for someone doing a talk when they were on a treadmill. I've had offers for when they were doing a bike ride, like one of those, the stationary bike. You can actually do that. So I would take you up on it if on their offer. I think it'll be pretty awesome. So maybe next time we can do that for sure.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone else as well for your time. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.